What's fascinating to me is when it comes to quarterbacks, there are really two things that play into account here. Number one, when you're talking about their draft stock, is how much media hype they've gotten. Let's be honest. Because you have certain guys like Connor Cook or Christian Hackenberg that the media's been talking about for 2 or 3 years in terms of whether or not they should be high picks in the NFL draft. So you start feeding that propaganda not enough, you start putting that narrative out there, and more people get caught up in it. More and more people start to get caught up into that, especially when you're talking about other members of the draft media, and most certainly fans as well, and probably, frankly, some NFL front offices as well. And the second thing that I will say is that sometimes it's very much when it comes to quarterbacks, it's all in the eye of the beholder, because there are those certain guys that you just sit there and you say, they played at a big level and they've got some traits or some tools, but they just don't seem to be getting the buzz that other guys do, and it's hard to figure out. And it was something I talked about a little bit with Jacob Coker at Alabama. There were certain things about him that just the more I watched him, the more I really liked. And I was really surprised, frankly, that he wasn't getting more buzz in NFL draft circles, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did in the last month or so heading up into the NFL draft. I start to look at Jake Rudock, who played in 2015 at Michigan after being a graduate transfer from Iowa, and I start to wonder if he doesn't fit into that same category a little bit. Now, I'm higher on Jacob Coker than I am on Jake Rudock, but there are some things that I do like about Rudock's game, even with some of the severe reservations I do have about some of his physical limitations to potentially be a starter at the NFL level. Now, in terms of his strengths, here's what I've liked about him in terms of especially the last 2 years, 2014 at Iowa and especially 2015 at Michigan, working under Jim Harbaugh, where I really saw some improvements in this game. Short area arm strength. When you're keeping the ball 10, 15 yards or less, he's a guy that can get decent zip on it. He doesn't get incredible zip on it, but I think his arm in that range is a little bit stronger than maybe a Dak Prescott's. Not a lot, but a little bit, and strong enough in that area. I think his footwork is pretty good. I think you could tell in 2015 that there was emphasis paid by Jim Harbaugh to working on those mechanics, working on those fundamentals, and I thought you saw some nice steps and improvement there in his footwork and in his overall throwing mechanics as well. I think he does a relatively good job of utilizing his full body in his throwing motion. This is something I emphasize quite a bit, especially with guys that don't have natural rocket arms, is you got to be able to generate that power from somewhere. And a lot of times strengthening your arm alone is not enough to get the job done. And in fact, that's not where the problem ultimately lies. It lies in not fully utilizing your lower body in the throwing motion and not following through on your throws all the way through. And I can say with Rudock, as I watched him, I thought his lower body usage in 2015 in particular was pretty solid. Consistently would follow through all the way on his throwing motion, would consistently utilizes lower body in his throwing motion and in his mechanics, which helped because he doesn't have a very naturally strong arm to begin with. I think when you look at him too, you could see in 2015 even more progression and development in the area of football IQ and football intelligence and awareness on the field in terms of his field vision. A guy that I thought got better at being able to read opposing defenses, understand defensive looks before the snap, a guy that was able to go through his progressions, look off safeties, do those different types of things. I saw quite a bit of improvement there in 2015, something I think bodes well for him, his potential at the NFL level. A guy that's a little more mobile than people give him credit for, too. Look, he's not a burner. He's not going to be a great athlete. He's never going to be a guy that gets you a ton of yards on his feet. But he's athletic enough. He can move on his feet enough to keep plays alive long enough to where he's not a total statue in the pocket, which is good because you talk about a guy that's maybe 6'2", 200 pounds. You don't want that type of guy being a statuesque pocket passer because, frankly, he's going to get killed, murdered at the NFL level, and he's going to be on the sidelines because he's injured so much. In terms of Rudock, I think he got better in terms of his skills as a game manager. Let's face it, he went to Iowa, so under Ferentz, you're not going to take a lot of risk. You're not going to take a lot of chances. Same thing under Harbaugh and that system that he used to run at Stanford. He ran at San Francisco, and he's running now at Michigan. It's a system that's designed to, be based off of a power running game and good decision making in the passing game. So even though Rudock at times made the occasional throw that was like, ugh, in general, I thought his game management skills were pretty good. And talking about his experience both at Iowa and at Michigan, I thought you looked at a guy that got some good looks and some good experience in more traditional pro-style offenses, even though I think that term needs to be modernized because it has changed and evolved from what we think of traditional pro-style offense being 10, 15 years ago. But I will say this, he has a lot of experience playing under center. He can play out of the shotgun as well. So there's not going to be an adjustment period there as opposed to other quarterbacks that come from straight out spread systems. They have to learn how to play under center because it does change everything about the position for them. You don't have to make that adjustment with Rudock. When it comes to Rudock, to me, I could sit there and nitpick different things. There are three things that really hold him back in terms of me thinking of him much higher as an NFL prospect. Number one is size. Not only is he 6'2", but more so he's only 200 pounds. So I have some concerns, more so than about his height, about his bulk and his build and his ability to hold up to the physical pounding of a full NFL season. There would be a worry for me that he would be an injury-prone type of guy. He just doesn't have much meat on his bones. He needs to get bigger. He needs to get stronger. That would, in a little ways, help another major deficiency in his game, and that is his arm strength. He could definitely get stronger in his arm. Even when I talked about a short area arm strength, maybe 10 yards or less, it's still not great. It's adequate. But anything outside of that, he just doesn't really have the natural arm strength to make that 20, 25-yard out throw or make that deep post throw on a rope that you need to make sometimes at the NFL level. He's got to get a lot stronger with his arm. And in this case, this is a guy that utilizes his lower body in his throwing motion. So he's got some of the fundamentals and the mechanics there. This is now more so an issue of just increasing the strength of his frame, improving his size, improving his build, and improving his actual physical arm strength that way. He's got to get a stronger arm to be able to hack it at the NFL level. He also needs to get more accurate as well. You'll notice for a guy I was talking about the lack of arm strength, you would think that he would be more accurate than honestly he really was. Even if he threw it into the general area of his receiver, his ball placement sometimes was lacking. Other times, it seemed like he would be 2, 3, 4 yards off the mark, and that could be dangerous when you go to the NFL level. So where there are areas about his game that I think could translate well, a lack of size, in particular bulk on his frame, a lack of functional, pure NFL arm talent and strength, and then a real lack of touch and feel and accuracy on his throws, it gives me pause about whether or not he's even a draftable prospect or not, if we're being honest. Now, to me, I see a guy overall that was an experienced, successful Big Ten starter, first with Iowa and then moving on as a graduate transfer to Michigan. So you like that experience in a major conference. He also has an experience of playing under center, so it's not something that would be a huge transition for him at the NFL level. It's one less thing you would have to worry about coaching him up and developing him on. He has those basics, those fundamentals in place. A guy, again, that I think has pretty good football intelligence, a smart type of guy. Doesn't take a lot of unnecessary risks. I don't think he makes a ton of terrible decisions with the ball. So some teams will like that, especially if they're looking at him as nothing more than a potential backup quarterback. They may sit there and say, hey, he could at least stick as a backup if anything else. If you're spending a day 3 pick on a quarterback like that, that's not the worst thing in the world to get out of a guy. How he addresses his weaknesses and his deficiencies, I think, is going to be critical. In some ways, who he reminds me of a little bit on film might be somebody like a Kirk Cousins, if I'm being honest, just because of the fact of, when I look at Kirk Cousins, I didn't think he had tremendous arm strength. Sometimes his accuracy, I think, was a bit off. His decision-making, I don't think, was as good as Rudock's, but there were other things to like about his game, so there's some similarities there with Rudock, but not a ton. But I think how he addresses those weaknesses and those deficiencies in particular are going to be key. He can't grow any taller, but he can get bigger and stronger. That's something he needs to do. He also needs to get much stronger in terms of his actual functional arm strength. If he can put some bulk on his frame and beef up to maybe 210, 215, and he can improve his arm strength, there's a chance. There's a chance he could develop someday into a low-end starting quarterback at the NFL level. There's a chance. I think overall, though, even if he addresses these deficiency areas, his real potential is a mid-level backup to a very low-end fridge type of, you're always looking to replace him, stopgap starter at the NFL level. So he's a guy that I would maybe spend a 6th-round pick on, but I just don't think there's enough natural arm talent there and there's so much room for improvement in getting his arm better to even get it up to snuff, where I would consider him as a real starting prospect at the NFL level, to where I would say, hey, maybe he's worth a third or fourth round pick. I've seen a lot of people view him as an undrafted prospect, and I get it again because of that lack of overall arm talent. But I think there are other intangibles in place and other things that work in his favor. And I think there are going to be a couple of coaching staffs that really like him and will feel like it's worth the risk, it's worth the gamble on him late in the draft, because maybe, who knows, in a couple of years he could develop into something more than you ever envisioned. If not, maybe he is what he is, a mid-level backup, and that's okay too, because he still would have validated you taking him maybe in round 6 or round 7.